Oh, hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, team. So, we are in week 7 with the multimedia discussion. This is MPA 510 History and Theory of Public Admin by Eric Sandoval. So, let's go ahead and dive into our overview. So, a brief overview of who I chose for this discussion. I went with, today we'll be discussing the teachings of the ones I found interesting. So, that was H. George Frederickson, and followed by that Warren Bennis. And then also we will dive into two peer-reviewed articles, one that's done by Lawrence E. Lynn, and her article is on George Frederickson, and then Ellen M. Hefts, her articles on Warren Bennis. So let's go ahead and dive into the teachings. So H. George Frederickson. The reason why I went with him, I felt like it was more terms of policy, and me, I do enjoy the policy aspect on the of the public admin. So, from my understanding on a section on towards a new public administration, um, I feel my understanding is he kind of helped push the new public admin movement, and essentially from my understanding he had an approach, or his essentially core arguments. um well, before I dive into that, it's essentially his new approach was more on like the social equity and democratic values that were kind of at the center of the administrative practice. So I feel as if a lot of what he was standing on, a lot of what he was kind of representing was like kind of his critique in a way towards public admin. I feel as if he had more of the classic kind of that bureaucratic model, where he kind of mainly focused on also like efficiency and economy and that kind of hierarchy control, right? So like how all that kind of failed to address like the real world problems, right? The real social problems that occur on day to day, and what are those? So that's essentially, from my understanding, was like the inequality, the poverty, and the discrimination that occurs within the public administration, and how that is never kind of really neutral, and how and essentially all those choices do have consequences. um so essentially like a key point is, for instance, like that social equity should be a principal objective, right, for all the public administration, just as important as it is for efficiency and for the economy. So essentially, he had a very humanistic approach, and democratic, emphasis, right? So he was essentially, I feel like he was advocating for a lot more of that humanistic approach, and to have administrators engage more with the people, with the citizens, and then especially those that work for them. So that was kind of my understanding of the new public administration, and essentially like he kind of looked at it as a game in a way. So the next up, I chose Warren G. Bennis. And I chose Warren G. Bennis because I felt like he was more towards the policy side in a way. It's kind of how I felt about it. So essentially, he had an argument, from my interpretation, he had an argument, essentially kind of stating that the traditional bureaucratic organizations, essentially, they're kind of outdated, right? It's rigid. It's more of the hierarchical and rule bound um, type of organization, essentially, and that it's no longer suited to be able to keep up with how rapidly things are changing in the real world, right? So essentially, he was stating that how the old bureaucracy, how it won't work in a way. He believed that um, that a lot of that was becoming outdated due to a lot of rapid technological advancements, also environmental changes. Um, Furthermore, like how different duties and responsibilities can have a very different amount of increase, complexity to it, in terms of tasks and goals. Followed by that, also like and changing work values, right? So among the people who want more of that autonomy, right, and want more meaningfulness within their jobs, and that also that how some of these rigid bureaus and hierarchies, essentially Bennett had a prediction kind of that a lot of there'll be a lot of adaptations, right? So a lot of organizations will kind of now need to be like a living system rather than just like being machine operated. So essentially, organizations need to be more flexible and decentralized. They need to be able to change and evolve and respond to different problems and social cues, and to be able to build around more networks and of professionals, but rather than just having fixed departments. Furthermore, then we'll dive into the peer-reviewed articles. So the one I selected was by the author is Lauren E. Lin, and the title of the article is called "Public Management Reform and Innovation: Research, Theory, and Application." H. George Frederickson and Jocelyn M. Johnston. So, in terms of Lauren and how she used H. George Frederickson to support her claims, from my understanding, Lynn, when she's discussing the work of H. George Frederickson, she helps explain his main idea, right? So as we look back, Frederickson is known for arguing that public admin is not just only about efficiency, but how it's also about social justice, public values, and equity. How I mentioned that he thinks there's a lot more um, uh, poverty and discrimination, and how there's an imbalance of that in the workplace. So essentially, she connects his idea to her claim by focusing on how public management reforms, they only focus on efficiency like private businesses, and that they ignore important democratic values. So she intertwined his statement of how public admin is just only about being efficient and the economy, but dismisses, as I mentioned, poverty, the imbalance, and the discrimination. So she connects her statement by utilizing his, and and so essentially, she's basically saying that Frederickson showed how public management can and is about the values and equity, and since that's true, the reforms that ignore those values are incomplete, and how therefore that the argument her that her argument about reform needs to include those ideas. So she's building her argument on his foundation. And then furthermore, for Ellen, the author is Ellen M. Hefts, and the title of the article is Warren Bennis. It's questioned and answered on today's leadership. So essentially, from my understanding, is she she uses her she uses his claim to support her by saying, essentially by saying that that instead of letting people think that leadership is only about management and authority, she uses Bennis's definition, about leadership is about vision, being authentic and self-knowledge, and that's being able to show why many organizations leaders fail when they ignore those qualities. So essentially, she's borrowing his description of leadership to shape the rest of her answers. Um, And that was my understanding of that. Okay. And thank you all for listening.